Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today we are going to be covering everything you need to know about the Division 2's Dark Zones. The Dark Zone is an iconic piece of Division content, historically signifying one of the game's most dangerous yet lucrative locations. It has shifted away from that philosophy a bit over time, but in essence, today I'm going to be covering the incentive behind the Dark Zone, as well as giving you tips on how to better prepare yourself for its unpredictability. A few important things to keep in mind: there is a pretty clear distinction in my mind between a Dark Zone guide and a PvP guide, right? Even though the Dark Zone heavily involves PvP in its design, this guide is going to be focused around the mechanics of the Dark Zone itself, what rewards it offers, how to farm it most efficiently, and how to hopefully protect your loot. Now, I do think that having at least a basic capability to try and defend yourself in a PvP encounter is quite vital. However, that will not be covered in this video. If you do need that advice, then after watching this, I highly recommend you check out my Ultimate PvP Beginner's Guide. I made it about 2 years ago now, so while there are a few minor details that are now outdated, the vast majority of it is still quite valuable, and you can read the comments on there from all the people who say their PvP ability increased after implementing some of the tips offered. So, as I said, I consider that to be a very complimentary guide to this one, and it will be linked in the description, pinned comment, everywhere, so go check it out. And additionally, I will try and make an updated version of that in the coming months, so stay tuned for that. But with all of that aside, let us get back to the core of this video, the Dark Zone. The place that so many players claim is the ultra toxic, impossible to enter without getting ganked, not worth your time. Look, I won't sit here and argue that it's never those things, but I do think that having some knowledge of the experience can help out a lot, and there are steps you can take to mitigate your risk while you're in there. So let us begin by answering one very important question: why would you want to go into the Dark Zone, especially when the additional risks like PvP and losing your collected loot are present? Well, the experience offers a few exclusive and enhanced rewards. Number 1, Dark Zone exclusive items. If you were unaware, there is an extensive list of named items that hold the title of Dark Zone exclusive, and among many others, this includes things like the Matador named Walker and Harris backpack, the Dark Winter named SMG, and the Emperor's Guard knee pads. So, some pretty desirable items. Now, the name Dark Zone exclusive is a little misleading because while these items began as purely exclusive to the DZ, over time the devs have expanded the places where it's possible to obtain these items. This includes things like named item caches, the odd seasonal boss drop that can show up in the vendor rotation for the countdown game mode. You even have a chance, albeit a very rare chance, to get the blueprints for these items in the Descent game mode. And that's kind of the caveat to all of this. Even though the DZ exclusive items are now available elsewhere, nowhere offers the same kind of reliability or the consistency in farming as their original drop source of the Dark Zone still does. So if there's a day where one of the DZs has targeted backpacks, there's a good chance that farming it for a good bit of time can yield you one or a few copies of the gift named Providence backpack. So the value there will differ for each player. It depends how much you might want some of these individual exclusive named items, or how many different stat rolls and copies of it you might want. I'll put a full list of the exclusive items up here on screen for you to see, so feel free to pause the video and screenshot whatever you gotta do. And I'll also link the original list in the video description. Number 2 on the desirable rewards list, exotic components. Now, for anyone who spent time in the Division 2's endgame, you'll know that exotic components are one of the game's most important endgame materials. Large quantities of them are required for the expertise system to increase your build's power level. You need them for reconfiguring exotics, which very soon you'll be able to reroll the third attribute on any exotic weapon using this method, so they'll be even more worthwhile for that. Simply put, they're a hard to come by and highly desired resource, and the Dark Zone offers the best drop rate for them in the entire game. Whereas open world level 4 control points have a 10% chance to drop an exotic component from the final loot crate, every Dark Zone chest has a 25% chance to drop a component. And these have no daily reset timer like the control point crates, and they're much faster to farm, so it's a pretty enticing bonus. Number 3 important reward, raid and legendary exotics. Have you been waiting for that perfect raid team to come together for the past 4 years to try and get the Eagle Bearer exotic AR? Or maybe legendary difficulty content is a bit too challenging for you and the Bighorn has always been out of reach? Well, the Dark Zone could be your answer. Now let me be very clear here, this is a minute drop chance, approximately 0.024% drop chance on any random NPC you come across in there, but the chance does exist for the Eagle Bearer, Ravenous, and Bighorn exotics to drop in the DZ, and these are their only other drop sources beyond those original raids and legendary missions. The chance to obtain one is also improved if a Dark Zone has the corresponding targeted loot allocation for a given day, so something to keep in mind for sure. And lastly, reward number 4, DZ resources. This one is a bit more straightforward, but DZ resources are earned via deconstructed loot and material crate pickups while in the DZ. And this is the sole currency accepted by the 3 DZ vendors in Washington, D.C. And they sell stuff like DZ exclusive brands and gear sets such as the Y'all and System Corruption, and that can make it much easier to level those sets up in the expertise system among other things. And you can also spend 170 DZ resources at any DZ vendor for an exotic cache, to either gain further exotic components or for the items themselves. So those, I would say, are the 4 main reward incentives of the Dark Zone. Of course, you also have your standard loot drops, you gain good shade experience from DZ activities, there's a high material yield, and the DZ leveling system can offer DZ caches, which give 2 heroic quality items each. But as an overview, those are some of the main reasons why you might be compelled to go into the Dark Zone. The question becomes, for the rest of this guide, how can I have the best shot at earning those rewards? We're going to be getting into greater specifics, but let's real quickly just go over some of the DZ structure and rule sets so that you know exactly what you're going to be walking into. The Division 2 has 3 separate Dark Zones across its Washington, D.C. map, and each of the 3 feature different geographic themes, meaning that at least in some small way, your combat encounters and traversal of these zones will differ slightly. That's not to say any of them are better than the others or that a build won't work on a certain map, it's just something that I think is good to be aware of. Dark Zone East is the largest of the 3, and it focuses more on open combat spaces and longer range sightlines. You'll find many wide and long streets here, a lot of the city's famous brutalist architecture, very angular in style, and in general, Dark Zone East allows you the opportunity to frequently see any threats coming your way long before they reach you. Moving over to Dark Zone West, this one is much more tailored for the mid-range combat style. You'll still find plenty of long roads, but DZ West also contains many more alleyways, cut-throughs, and other unique elements that set it apart, and its setting in the more rural Georgetown area definitely makes it distinctive. And lastly, DZ South, this zone plays much more into the premise of close-range combat and verticality. It features not only many scalable buildings and multi-level structures, but also an entire sprawling underground section within this train yard. The streets seem to feature much more debris and vehicles, meaning even the wider spaces within this zone are prone to those in-your-face kind of encounters. Those are the differences between the 3 DZs, but there's also a lot they share in common. For one, every Division 2 Dark Zone has 3 extraction points within them. This is how you extract your Contaminated Loot, one of the key mechanics of the DZ. The primary PvE activity within the Dark Zone are landmarks. They're wave-based encounters set at specific locations that will rotate in availability depending on where the server's player population is skewed, so it will try and promote traversal across the map. And the difficulty of the landmarks you'll see, normal through heroic, dictate both the reward you're given. Higher difficulty means higher rewarded XP, but for each difficulty notch that you climb, it adds 1 additional enemy reinforcement wave to the encounter. You also then have supply drops. These come in periodically, roughly every half hour, and while they offer a guaranteed boss drop and solid rewards from the drop itself, they are marked on the map for all, increasing the risk of encountering other players. And that brings us to one of the biggest factors while playing in the Dark Zone, rogue agents. Every Dark Zone server can hold a maximum of 12 players, and at any time a player can choose to go rogue, which enables player versus player combat against any other division or rogue agents who are not on your team. And the only other big thing to cover as far as the setup of the Dark Zones is invaded versus non-invaded DZs. Now, anytime you're in the game, you can check your map to see which of the Dark Zones are currently under which status. The standard purple zones mean they're non-invaded, however, at any given time, one of them will be marked in red, and that is the invaded zone of the day. And this all rotates between the 3 once per day. Functionally, there's not much of a difference between them, but there are a few notable exceptions. Non-invaded Dark Zones have turrets enabled at every checkpoint to try and help deter camping. These are not present in the invaded DZ. The invaded DZ exclusively features the Black Tusk faction, whereas the others can feature the Hyenas, True Sons, or Outcasts. This also makes the invaded DZ supply drop event more lucrative because it has 4 bosses instead of the standard 2 at the non-invaded drops. In essence, the idea is that the invaded DZ has even greater risk and it's even more lethal and unpredictable, especially with other players. But like I said, functionally the 2 variations don't feel that different. And there's no major difference in loot, drop rates, etc. between the two types, so in general I suggest picking which one you'll be playing in by the targeted loot available or by whichever zone you prefer the most. With that out of the way, let's quickly go over two very important aspects that you're going to want to consider before heading into the Dark Zone on a regular basis. The first of which being your build. Now, I'm of the mind that you've got two choices when it comes to your loadout selection for the DZ. Either you roll the dice and assume that you're either going to be able to escape or avoid all PvP encounters while you're in the Dark Zone, and therefore you take in a build that is purely tailored for the zone's PvE content. Or you bring something in that will do perfectly well against the PvE challenges and enemies you'll face, but is also capable of taking on another player if need be. I personally think the latter option is the smarter one, even if you don't intend on PvPing, but the choice is up to you. The honest truth is that so many different builds and combinations can work in the DZ depending on if you have a group, how you plan to play, and many more factors. One general reminder I will give is that NPCs in all PvE content in the Dark Zone is set to challenging difficulty, so if you want to benchmark a build in the open world or elsewhere before entering the DZ, that's the bar you're going to want to meet. With all of that said, if you want a build recommendation, this is what I take into the Dark Zone 90% plus of the time I go in there. It's very versatile, puts down NPCs very quickly, but importantly it also excels at going toe-to-toe with enemy players. And again, I think that is the ideal setup to aim for, but you can make your own determination. If you do like the look of this setup, do note that an Eagle Bear is not required for your primary. That's just what I like to run. You can slot in any other good high-end AR. Other than that, all of these pieces are just rolled for high crit chance and damage. Might take you a little bit to assemble things, but for the most part this should be achievable. And so as to avoid making this video needlessly long, if you do want the full breakdown of this build to see what I have rolled on each piece, etc., I have a separate video doing just that, and you can find it linked in the top corner of the video right now, and it will be down in the description as well. Okay, and then the last thing to cover before heading into the DZ is your Dark Zone perks. Alright, so DZ perks are a thing that maybe some of you are aware of, maybe some of you not. I wouldn't call them integral to your Dark Zone experience, but they do provide you some buffs and just general bonuses while you're in the Dark Zone. So they're good to keep an eye on just so you ensure that you have the maximum possible advantage when you're in there. The way you can check them out when you're right here in the main room of the White House, you just want to head this way, take a right, head up the stairs towards where Manny and some of the things are up here. If you loop around back into this room, and approach right here, the Dark Zone officer, you can open the menu and see your Dark Zone perks. Now what you see here is going to depend on how much time you spent in the Dark Zone previously. Maybe you played a few years ago, you got a few levels, maybe you've never been in there and you have none of these unlocked. Really, I just want to point this out so that whichever stage you are at, you can make sure that you either unlock these now or you come back to them later and unlock them so that, like I said, you have the maximum possible advantage. And there's some useful perks. You see here, Tier 1, it gives you more slots in your contaminated bag, which means you can extract more stuff at one time. That's useful. On Tier 2 here, you get a bit more of XP for eliminating rogue agents. Again, not all of them are going to be super applicable towards what you might be doing in the Dark Zone, but again, just is worthwhile to go through them. This gives you more rewards in the safe house, a bit less XP lost on death. That's certainly going to be useful. More keys from playing in the DZ, right? You get grenade chance on that. This one is pretty important. If you're going to be farming primarily in the DZ on Tier 7, I recommend you go with the X-ray eyes, because it means you can see rogues that are approaching you 15 meters sooner so that you have a better chance to try and escape. Then down here, you get a better chance for armor kits when you kill rogues, more rewards from the safe house, you get even more space in your bag. Again, this one's going to be super vital. And then the last one, Tier 11, some people, if they're into PvP, they might choose this, but I think this one's super useful. It allows you to revive agents 25% faster while you are not rogue, which can be pretty helpful, like I said, if you're trying to survive those rogue encounters. So, once again, your current progress on this is going to vary depending on how much you've played the Dark Zone before, but wherever you're at, just be aware that this system exists and periodically come back and make sure you have the perks selected that you want. Alright, with that down, what are we looking at here? You've locked in a build, got your perks prepped, you know what awaits you in the DZ when you head in, so you're all good. Yeah? Well, almost. Now look, I've been asked countless times over the years, and I'm sure I will continue to be asked for many more to come, what are some of the best tips for surviving the Dark Zone? And frankly, my answer has always remained the same, and it does until this day. I don't care how good you are at PvP, I don't care how fast or slow your reaction time is to sudden dangers arising, none of it matters if you don't have an idea of what is going on around you and where you are. If you have no sense of direction, you're going to be a rogue's afternoon snack in the DZ. It's that simple. So, before you head into the Dark Zone expecting to run out with bags of loot, I cannot recommend enough that you follow this one vital suggestion first, and that is to learn the DZ maps. Now, whether you plan to play in all 3 DZs, whether you maybe only like 1 or 2 of them depending on their layouts, It doesn't matter. Before you plan to spend any significant amount of time in one of the 3 DZs, I cannot stress enough how important it is for you to go in there and simply learn the map. Figure out your surroundings, walk in with whatever your preferred build is, don't pick up any loot, and simply explore. It doesn't matter if you die to rogues a few times or if even NPCs pick you off, all you want to do is get a sense of what's where within the Dark Zone, where different landmarks are located, where the safe room is in case you need to run back to it, because I promise you this will either be your best defense if you learn it, or it will be your biggest weakness if you don't. A solo player who's just picked up that incredibly rare 0.024% drop rate Eagle Bear has very little chance to survive in a head-on fight if a rogue squad of 4 players were to try and attack them. And so let's say you try and run, but you don't know where the hell anything is, you're gonna run into a dead end and throw your controller across the room when you die. But if you take the time to know the environment you're going to be playing in before you spend time there, I promise you that you will thank yourself 10 times over later on. Because the difference between knowing the best route to the closest checkpoint from wherever you are in the DZ and not is a big deal. So if you take anything away from this video, that is my number 1 piece of advice, is before going into a multi-hour DZ farm, take an hour, 2 hours to simply wander around and learn the layout of the Dark Zone you're going to be playing in. It will be well worth your while. Alright, my friends, well at long last, I think it is finally time to enter Dark Zone. Drumroll please. Welcome.
Proximity coverage only.
Alright, now what I first wanted to do was just to visualize and go over some of the things that I think you should really be looking out for while you're farming and going around the Dark Zone. The first is expanding upon the concept of landmarks that we talked about. These are what they are. Once again, they are the primary PvE activity within the Dark Zones. And you can determine their individual difficulties by what is labeled there. You can see on the name it says hard, and also on the visual indicator there it has 2 chevrons, whereas the one next to it is a challenging. It has 3. This is the exact same system they use throughout the rest of the game, so you should recognize it there. And when you view the rewards, you can see the XP differences between them. The higher difficulty, the more XP, all of that. But once again, that difficulty is not communicated in terms of the individual challenge of the enemies. They're all going to be at challenging level, the same equivalent to that difficulty within the open world. What changes between, for example, a hard and challenging landmark is the number of respawn waves you'll get. So the challenging one would have 1 additional respawn wave compared to the hard, and a heroic one would go up 1 more, etc. But again, what's very important to note is that these are not all of the available possible landmark spots within this zone. For example, you could have 1 spawn out here, there's 1 right around there, 1 right next to me, 1 in here, a few down here, right? They could be all over, but they don't all spawn at once. They spawn according to where players are in the Dark Zone as the game tries to encourage you to move around the map. So you'll see these landmarks dynamically respawn, go inactive, etc. I think we just saw 1 clear right here, so that's basically how that works. But what remains at every possible landmark spot across any of the Dark Zones, regardless of if they are currently populated or not, is the Dark Zone chests. And this is what we covered towards the beginning of the video, contains exotic components, which are one of the most desirable resources within the DZ. So for example, this current landmark that I'm in does not have any enemies in it. It's inactive. However, its Dark Zone chest is still here. Now this one, as you can see, has been claimed within the last few minutes by a player, so it's currently open and I can't claim it. But even if a landmark is inactive, it is worthwhile for you to go out of your way to go inside one to see if you can claim the chest and potentially get an exotic component. And when you do, this is also extremely important, these do not go into your contaminated bag, meaning you do not need to go and extract exotic components. As soon as you pick one up, which again it has a 25% chance per chest, it will go immediately to your inventory. And this is another reason why farming them here is very valuable, because that risk factor is not involved with needing to extract it. And once again, like we covered earlier in the video, what's going to help you know where these are as best as possible is just exploring the Dark Zones, learning where all of the possible landmark spawns are, and finding out where the chest is so that while you're running by, you can quickly pop in, see if it's available, and if so, hopefully claim those exotic components. Alright, now the next thing to keep an eye out on while you're traversing across the Dark Zone are these little boxes right here. Now they kind of look like the electronics boxes that you would see across the rest of the game, however I'd say they're about maybe half the depth. These grant you, if I loot this one, you'll see 1 DZ resource, and DZ resources are that other currency that I said is a very high incentive for playing the Dark Zone. It gives you access to whatever the DZ vendors are selling. You can also purchase exotic caches with them, so they're very valuable. If you pick up DZ resources from these little chests, you also, just like the exotic components that we covered, do not need to extract them. They go directly to your inventory, so don't need to worry about extracting if you get them through that method. However, if you deconstruct gear, and we can show this by going down to this crate right here, let's say you find a piece of gear that you don't need to extract, you don't want it, great, well let me deconstruct it then, but since it's contaminated, that does then add the DZ resource to my contaminated bag. So just keep in mind that there are those two separate ways of earning DZ resources within the Dark Zone. Whether or not you get them from the crates, then they don't need to be extracted, or if you deconstruct gear, then they do need to be extracted. Alright, now the last thing I wanted to cover as far as rewards go are these random patrols that you'll find across the Dark Zone. Now it is true that the primary PvE activity and incentive within the DZ are landmarks, as we've already covered. However, as we also talked about earlier on, these random patrols have historically been known to drop those super rare raid and legendary exclusive drops, like the Eagle Bear, the Ravenous, and the Bighorn. So as long as you are comfortably and able to take on these patrols, it is always recommended that you clear any enemy that you come across, because you never know what kind of drop they're going to give. That would have been insane if it had dropped one right there, but it did not. Point being, always take out any enemies that you see within the DZ, because you never know what they might drop. Alright, now let's talk a little bit about other players and rogue agents. So you can see I have this squad right here that seems very nervous by my presence near them. Basically, my biggest recommendation I can give towards other players in the DZ, specifically if you're only in here to farm and you have no intention to do like dedicated PvP fights, is that you need to have your mind accept beforehand that you are going to flight instead of fight. And of course, that's a reference to the basic human instinct that we all have of fight or flight. There's no benefit to seeing another player go rogue nearby, or you're aware that there is a rogue nearby, and hesitating and trying to determine what your next steps are going to be. If you know that you're most likely going to lose that fight and you're trying to protect the loot that you have, you need to know that as soon as you see that indicator, you need to try and figure out where they are, or even if you can't, just take off and head away from wherever you suspect the danger is going to be. Now, there are a few different ways that you can know this threat is coming. For one, if there is a rogue agent that enters your proximity, I don't know what the exact range is, but Isaac will give you an audible alert that says rogue agent detected nearby. That's probably your most surefire way to know that, danger is coming. Additionally, let's say these people right in front of me, if you can visibly see and you're in close proximity to other players and they start to go rogue, you can see, and I'll do it right now, look above my head or right where my Isaac brick is on my shoulder, you'll see that red ring that shows that you're about to go rogue. And other players will display that as well if they're about to do it, or if they are currently rogue, their name will appear in red and you'll have the full, visible indicators that they are a threat. One other very useful tactic to tell if there are players nearby, let's say I didn't see these people for whatever reason, I could go around the corner here, and if you go into your social menu, it will display all the people. I think this is within like a 100-meter radius, so if you see people's names on this list and you're not sure if you do have people nearby, whether they're rogue or not rogue, their names will show up on this list, so that is a really good tactic to be able to use to determine how close you are to other players. Now, as far as tracking rogue and potentially manhunt players, they will periodically ping on the map, at least rogues will. Manhunts will give you a more approximate location where they are, which should allow you to hopefully stay away from them, right, if you're trying not to get involved. But like I said, for the most part, it's really just about being aware, knowing what's around you in terms of, geography. Like I said, still that number one tip of knowing where you are in the Dark Zone, what the layout is, and having it ingrained in your mind whether or not you intend to fight or flight whenever a rogue agent appears or is nearby you. Now, let's say for whatever reason that you have a need to go rogue, maybe someone stole your loot, they're no longer on the rogue timer. The way you activate the rogue status is to hold, at least on controller, it is the same button that opens your map, right? If I do that, now I hold the button, they're both within that same functionality. I think that PC has a separate key binding you can check within your menu. That's the way to manually activate the rogue status. You can also hack one of the rogue terminals. I don't know if there's one nearby here or not. That will put you into a quick little rogue status. It does also allow you to see like loot boxes nearby, so there can be a potential advantage to that. So yeah, if you come across these little terminals right here, you can see it has the little plus rogue icon there. That means that if I do this, I'll go rogue. I'll do it just to demonstrate. So now I'm rogue, I have that quick little timer, but that buff that's now on my HUD means that I have a bit of an extra detection of where loot boxes are. You can see that one that's right there. I can see some that are down there. So it can be useful, especially if you know no one is nearby you. You get a better sense of where these different loot crates can be, but just be warned that that will send you rogue whenever you do that. And then one of the other ways is that if someone has hooked their contaminated bag onto an extraction rope, you can, it'll give you the prompt to cut that rope, but that will make you rogue. So definitely beware if you're going to try and do that when other players are around. It's probably not going to end very well for you. Alright, now the last big and important section that we need to cover as far as Dark Zone gameplay is the loot and extraction phase of the experience. As you spend more time in the Dark Zone, you're going to come across two types of loot. The first is like completion-based stuff. If you complete a landmark, it might give you a piece of gear that goes straight to your regular inventory, so you just deal with it as normal. But for the majority of loot, specifically the more rare stuff that you're really going to want, like named items, exotics, etc., those drop on the ground in the DZ and they are contaminated. That means that they go to your contaminated bag, which you can manage right here next to your regular inventory. And anything in here means it needs to be extracted before you leave the Dark Zone. If you try and go through a Dark Zone checkpoint and back out in the open world, or you try and fast travel away, it will delete all of this stuff and you won't get to keep it. You have to extract it through the Dark Zone before you get to call it yours. And so all three of the Dark Zones have three separate extraction points, and down here in south we have the southern one there, the western one here, and we're at the northern one right here. Now what this entails is calling in, as you can see I have the prompt on my screen to call in an extraction. That begins a 90-second timer for the chopper to arrive, after which it will wait for 1 minute for any available players to hook their loot bags on there. It can hold a maximum of 4. Sounds easy enough. The problem is that as soon as you call an extraction, it broadcasts that to the entire Dark Zone, meaning that this is the highest point of risk and stress for other players to come in and potentially try and kill you and steal your loot. However, as I said at the beginning of the video, I believe that there are steps that you can take to mitigate those risks, so let's go over some of those tips. The first thing I'm going to do is call the extraction right here, and then no, stop. You've already made a mistake. Certainly, you can call the extraction wherever you want across the zone. You can see up on the minimap wherever there's orange means I can call it there. A lot of players' first mistake is that they call this right out in the open and expect that it's going to go just fine. But think about it. If I call the extraction right here, how many different points could a player pop out at and shoot me, either when I'm hooking my bag or whatever the case may be? They could be sitting somewhere up there. They could pop out from behind that truck over there. They could come in through that walkway. They could be up on this elevated surface. Right, the physical spot in which you call in the flare matters a lot. So if I was personally going to extract here, I think there's kind of two areas I would generally look at. One is right here. This closes off a lot of those risk areas that we just pointed out. You could still potentially get shot from up here, but it's a lot less visible. Someone could come through there, but this truck blocks off that entire side of the extraction, and this thing does as well, significantly reducing the number of spots you need to watch out for other players. Alternatively, I might check out the other side of the extraction point here. And I think back in this corner, also you close off a lot of those risk areas where, again, players could potentially pop out and shoot you. And that's good timing. You can see up in the corner that someone else just called an extraction. So again, as soon as you do it, everyone in the Dark Zone is going to see that you're doing it. However, this is a good point to mention that you can use other people's actions as potential diversions to your own things that you're doing. So that's been going for 30 seconds. Maybe a player is going to head to that one. Let's call in this extraction right now and see what happens. Now, when you do this, another mistake people will make is just sitting right on the point that they called it and waiting for it to arrive. Sure, you can do that, but again, you're opening yourself up to more risk than is potentially necessary. What I would personally do is probably go up here to a spot where I can see very clearly what's happening across the entirety of the extraction zone. Because if a player pulls up, I want to know that they're there before they know where I am. So I have the advantage to be able to choose whether or not I want to stick around or I want to try and run away. Again, a really great tool here is going to be using that social menu feature that we just talked about. And I can see right now that there's someone within approximately 100 meters that I previously did not know about, right? So now with that information, I'm going to start scanning and trying to see where they are. Additionally, I did switch builds just to demonstrate this. The decoy is a really great skill for this because if someone arrives and they flag rogue, it's going to put my nameplate not over my own head, but wherever my decoy is. And again, that's just another small amount of time you can buy yourself to potentially run away if a player does come and flag rogue. So now I can see he's pulling up on me right here. I'm going to start moving around because he's probably going to try and flag on me. And so that's the stuff that you're going to have to watch out for, right? And once I know that he's on me, I can start heading back towards the checkpoint if I want to try and be protected by the turrets with the loot that I have in my bag, even though I don't care about what I have right now. Or you can potentially try and fight him off. So he just went rogue right there. I'm going to turn now, and I got him just like that. Of course, that's going to be dependent on your build, on your own PvP skill. He dropped me a lot of stuff, so I'm going to take that, deconstruct the rest, and now with that threat gone, we're going to return back to the rope here. Before I go over to it, though, I'm going to check my social menu one more time. That's still the same guy that we killed. He hasn't respawned yet, so nobody else is nearby. I'm still going to throw my decoy just in case someone arrives. They're going to see that instead of me. Okay, so that spot was maybe not the best, most ideal because it actually put it up here. But you get the point about choosing where you're going to call in the rope. Matters a lot. This is still, I would argue, slightly better than out in the middle because at least you have a little bit of protection with those sandbags. But you get the point that I'm making there. And now once again, let's reposition to a better spot, so if someone were to arrive and try and cut the rope, if I go in this thing, I would have a pretty good sight line on them doing it right there, and I have a lot of protection on the side and whatnot. So it's really just about approaching it logically. How can I protect myself the best, even in this scenario that's going to be widely unpredictable and probably dangerous? But just like that, 2, 1, and the loot is now safe, as it's going to be pulled up to the helicopter. After that, timer expires, the loot is officially yours. You'll see up at the top, extraction complete, and I've gotten all of those things that were within my DZ bag. And that's all there is to it, folks. Again, I know the prospect of the Dark Zone can be quite daunting, especially that extraction portion when you know that people could arrive at any time. But as you saw I did with that player, I could have kept running straight to the checkpoint and just hid in there until he went away. You know, a lot would argue that the Dark Zone shouldn't be designed like that, but it is. So if you want to take advantage of those things and protect you and your loot as much as you possibly can, that's how you can do it. Also, as I stated, these things are not going to work 100% of the time. When there's PvP and other players involved, things are going to happen that you can't control, but there are many steps that you can take to mitigate that risk, and so hopefully all of that stuff helped out. The last thing I'll point out is that after a successful extraction and you want to claim those items, all you have to do is return to a Dark Zone checkpoint or anywhere you can access a stash within the game. You go over to your mailbox, and in deliveries is where you're going to find that stuff. So this is the Fenris chest that I just extracted, and the DZ resources will be under special deliveries, as you can see right there. And that is going to do it, my friends, with the culmination of everything we have gone over in this video. I sincerely hope and truly believe that you will be far more equipped and prepared to take on what awaits in the Dark Zone. The important thing to remember is that ultimately you can never be ready enough. Sometimes you're going to run into players, NPCs, or just scenarios that simply become too overwhelming, and the nature of the DZ will always remain that of true unpredictability. But as I said at the beginning of the video, that doesn't mean that you have to feel helpless. So once again, I hope you feel more equipped after the information presented in this guide, and I hope your future DZ runs are successful. If you have any further questions, thoughts, or whatever after watching this, please do share them down in the comments below. And if by any chance you're a DZ veteran who is watching this, first of all, thank you, but also leave any advice you may have for newer players who are trying to figure out the experience that I might not have covered in the video. If the guide did help you out, I would be incredibly appreciative if you'd consider clicking the subscribe button if you haven't already. It truly helps me out and lets me know that you enjoy stuff like this. And yeah, everyone, best of luck in the Dark Zone, and watch your back. That is all I've got for today, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Ow.